Thank you so much, Mr. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join me as I talk about this exciting topic about how do we power up empowerment and how do we make empowerment a real thing that people feel, just not a word that we say. So we really want to make sure that today is a little bit interactive as well. So as Mr. said, do please put your comments in chat. Feel free to share your stories, examples, questions as we go through. I'd love to get everyone's perspectives as we go through this, because sometimes empowerment can be a perilous journey, and how we navigate that is really important, that we do that consciously, and sharing and collaborating, getting ideas from everyone is really important. So we want to use that same ethos in our session today. So please do use that chat channel. And just to warm us up, please say hi in the chat channel. And just say where you're from as well, just to help us all connect and get the conversation going in the chat channel. So feel free to jump right in there. Oh, lovely, Maraitai. Thanks, Beth. Good to see you. All right. As we're kind of doing our introductions, a couple from Maraitai. Very nice. Let's talk about the definition of empowerment. And as you're putting your hellos in the chat, I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you feel is empowerment. Now, there's a definition from Wikipedia. I've put that on the screen. It's a little bit mundane and boring. I'd love to hear what you guys feel is your definition of empowerment. And then I'm going to share my little view on it as well. And then we'll crack into getting some more feedback from you. So in the chat channel, just share with me what your thoughts are. Is what is empowerment? What does it mean to you? What does empowerment mean to you? And pop that in the chat channel. Yeah, great. Clear goals, letting them get onto it. Fabulous. Autonomy. Great. See what else comes up. Trust, really great word. We're going to talk about that a little bit more too. Anything else that comes to mind? Yeah, great call out, Zoe. Feeling capable and equipped to achieve what you want. And we're going to talk about capability actually, because that's one of the critical elements in creating an empowered team. So thank you for raising that. Feeling that you have the tools and support, know where you've got, you know, I've got this. What a great feeling. Being connected to agency, having agency and gaining value from that. Being able to decide how you do your work without having any actions pre-approved, checking that whole permission seeking, not having to do that, having a safe environment to show off your talents. I love that aspect actually. We're going to talk about, you know, people being able to bring their whole selves, not just the portion that's required for the job description. So great call out. Encouragement enabled. Thanks, Luke. Trusting oneself, understanding support is available. Clear boundaries. That's a really great call out as well. The clarity. Okay. So in terms of some of the things that I think about too is the word freedom. So it's the freedom to do the important stuff in the best way possible and bringing that knowledge to bear. And I really like the comment about the dinner tonight as well in the chat. So well done on that. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions now, and I want you to respond in chat. The first one is, I just want to poll everyone who wants to be empowered at work. It's a Y for yes, and it's an N for no. Let's just get a quick sense across the board. So who wants to be empowered at work? A Y for yes, N for no. So it sounds like at this point in time, it's overwhelmingly yes. We all want to be empowered at work. So that's the next question then, and let's see if that changes. Do you actually feel empowered at work? Y for yes, N for no. Okay, good. There's a dot dot. There's an S sometimes. Yeah. Okay, some yeses, some sometimes. Yeah. And let's go through now and ask the next one. Have you ever been told you're empowered, but you don't feel it? Has that ever occurred to you? Y for yes, N for no. Yeah. Yeah. So a mixed bag, but a few of you saying yes. And there's a real feeling with that, a feeling of frustration when you've been told you're empowered, but everything else tells you that that's not the case, whether it's a feeling of safety, whether it's a feeling of being able to make decisions, whether it's being included, all of these things come to bear. So we're going to explore some of these elements as we go through. Now, Misfit gave you a little bit about my background and responsibilities from a talent and culture perspective, but I want to share some of these learnings have come from doing some deep work in our own organization. And that came from scaling our organization post-COVID. And we faced a situation where, although we loved a flat hierarchy, what was happening was, because of the growth that we had some directors that had over 20 direct reports. And the feeling and feedback that we were getting from our teams was that people were starting to feel disconnected and unable to get the support from leadership that they wanted. But we didn't want to break the ideas or intent around why we had such a flat hierarchy. So we still wanted to be able to create an environment that really supported self-selection, self-organizing, being able to give power to the people to be able to evolve how they organize themselves. And in that, we talked about things like being able to select your own leader, select your own team that you're in, be able to take charge of your development, all of those kinds of good things. And as we've traveled on those journeys, along with the other experience that Misfit talked about, there's a few learnings and reflections that we've worked through as we go along. So I'm going to share some of those with you today. So the first thing is that obviously empowerment is something that everybody wants, but there is actually some real benefits to empowerment that has been studied and brought through. Now, I did a poll on LinkedIn a few months ago, and this was the outcome of that poll, which is around, okay, well, these are the things that we believe are benefits from empowerment. I just want you guys to jump back on chat for a second and just talk about, what do you see as the benefits of empowerment? Are there words there that really resonate with you? Are there words in your mind that come to you that aren't on that list? Pop them in the chat and we'll just have a look through. And then I'm going to share some research with you in a moment. So things like innovation, safety, being engaged, coming through on the chat, creativity, having the onus, creativity, growth, ownership, buy-in, being accelerated. And in the word cloud, you'll see things in there around trust. And we heard that word earlier on today. Also a sense of belonging, being subjective well-being, motivation, that engagement and fulfillment. And certainly, particularly post-COVID, we've seen a lot of engagement surveys coming out about people wanting to be connected to purpose in terms of their work and having that work-life balance. Okay, great. Well, let's look at the research. So HBR published a report, and I've put a link in this deck for you, and it talks about a study that was done. And in the study, it was done with over 10,000 people, and I think they did 30 companies or across 30 countries. And in that, they came up with the following results that you see on the right-hand side. So stronger job performance, job satisfaction, commitment to the organization, a thing that they called citizenship behavior. Now, that's the behavior which is, I'm willing to go above and beyond to help out. I'll help out at the after work function. I'll do this, I'll do that. It's those little things that help a team really gel together and go above and beyond. Creative, helpful, novel ideas, new ways of thinking and working, and ability to scale all came through in that research. So it's really clear that from an empowerment perspective, there's really strong benefits. And who wouldn't want that? In fact, on the call, we know that everyone was really keen for it. And so from that perspective, if we look at it from an individual lens, bringing all of myself to work, and we talked about that a little bit earlier in the introductions, that came through from a leader perspective, leaders having a sense of relief that they don't have to have all the ideas all of the time. They don't have to have all of the answers all of the time. They don't have to carry the load for everyone. So that's definitely a benefit coming through. And from a team perspective, and this came through in your chat, is we can work the best way. So we can choose the best course because we're the ones that have the most insight into what that is. And then, of course, from an organization perspective, things like engagement, innovation, productivity are all really clear. So the benefits are there. Everybody wants it in all different lenses. So we should just turn it on, right? Surely it's that easy. Well, in reality, we all want it, but it gets a little tricky. Simply saying that you're empowered doesn't make it so, and things can go a little bit south. So I want to talk very briefly about how things can go wrong if we just try to wave the magic wand. Well, the first thing is from Henry Niebuhr. You'll see a little story here about misalignment. Some teams thinking it's a bridge, some teams thinking it's a tunnel, and having that misalignment and where we're going. We all know that we want to cross the water, but we've got different views on how we're going to do that. So misalignment can be a side effect of it being implemented poorly. Then we've got things like, if we say that people are empowered, but we don't have the rest of it set up, things can come through. And in fact, in the HBR research, it said that people felt that even though they did all the same mechanics about giving people empowerment, some people felt that they were in fact being exploited, not empowered. They were given additional responsibilities, given more harder decisions to make. But for some people, that didn't equal empowerment, it equaled being exploited. For others, people can feel like it's overwhelming, that there isn't a rule book that we're suddenly following. There isn't a really clear right or wrong, that as they've got empowerment, they're having to make decisions and navigate the gray that somebody else would do previously. So that could be overwhelming for people. Or if we've got lots of empowerment going in the organization, but we don't have the connections to keep that alignment, then there can be confusion. Nobody knows what's going on. So that can be a side effect. And talking from an individual perspective, that there can be a sense of vulnerability. Suddenly, I'm being asked to make decisions that I haven't been asked to make before. I'm not sure about what's right or wrong. I don't know if this thing about being empowered is really real. Is something going to be happen to me? Am I safe to make mistakes? What happens if I make mistakes? So there can be increased vulnerability, fear, and stress on individuals if you go too far on the empowerment without the right support. So just in the chat channel, if you've got anything that resonates from that perspective, please share it in chat where you've seen things that go slightly sideways or maybe sideways in a big way, where people have simply said it's empowerment, tried to flip a switch, and things haven't gone well. Please share in the chat. Yeah, actually, that's a good call out, Charlotte. So Charlotte's put a comment in there about when there's empowerment, but somebody is underperforming, how do you manage that in a self-empowered team? Because there's no one who might own it in terms of addressing it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of the team dynamic a little bit later on. So thank you for that. Let's touch on that a little bit later. And apart from all the things that I said, there's still a real kicker to this that you need to be aware of. Here's the thing, needs and situations can change. So I've seen this in organization, it's backed up in the HBR research that in fact, people's needs can change from one to the other, and situations can change, and how people feel about how distant their leader is to them changes their perception on how empowered they feel. For example, on the left-hand side, we have a team saying, hey, leader, back off, give us some space. Give us some opportunity to come up with different ways here and really explore and look at different options. On the other side and on the other end, we've got a team going, hey, well, where's the leader? They're just not showing up. Where are they? We need some direction. They've just left us with maybe with the baby or whatever it is. So there's a real balance and a nuance in terms of how people feel about empowerment, how close they want their leader, how much empowerment they actually want does differ, and it differs from person to person. And here's the really interesting thing, and Miss Biz on the call, and she's done some extensive research on this, so feel free to put any questions around millennials and Gen Z in the chat. But essentially, when it comes to generational difference, millennials and Gen Z, and that's covering the whole birth period of 1985 to 2010, is that they have a higher expectation of distributed decision making. They have a higher expectation around inclusion in things and having a voice in the decisioning. So whether we like it or not, organizations do need to be able to get better now around empowerment and how that works in reality, in order for these new workforces to be coming through. And I think, Ms. B, you were saying, actually, we've already got lots of millennials on deck now, and it's going to be growing, right? So two things. of all the things that could go wrong, there is some nuance. There's some tricky things to navigate. Each individual will have a different perception around their comfort, around levels of empowerment and what empowerment means to them. And then we're going to have higher expectations around empowerment and the ability to be autonomous and be involved in decisions as we go through. All right, so the question is, what's the answer? Well, if we can't just flick a switch, what do we need to do? And it's certainly a journey that we need to go through. The trick is that the journey has to include people on the journey, and it's not a straight line, because you're going to have to use the old agile principle of sensing and reflecting and adjusting your plan as you go through, because your individual's needs are going to be very different as you go through. So I'm going to talk a little bit around some of those components, and then we're going to break it down into 4 key areas. We'll talk about it at a high level, and then we'll break down what does it mean from an individual perspective, a team perspective, a leader perspective, and an organization perspective. All right. Can I just get a Y in the chat if you guys have seen this chart before? If lots of you have seen it, I won't go into too much detail, but it's a diagram used by Spotify. Great, lots of you have seen it. And very quickly, it's just talking about that the more autonomy you're looking to provide, the more alignment, or the stronger the alignment needs to be. So from an axis perspective, the more autonomy, the more alignment. It's like a calculation. Increase one, you need to increase the other. And I've put some links in there so that you can watch the YouTube video in more detail. But I'll tell you a little bit of a story. And this is by David Marquette. And again, the video link will be in the document, and you can listen to it from there. But essentially, he talks about a situation where he was giving autonomy to a team to be able to load a submarine. It happened to be a warhead missile of some sort. And there was an accident. And in the accident, thankfully, nobody was injured, but it could have caused major injury. And one of the things that he talks about in there is that the more control that you give to the team, the more capability and clarity you need to give. And he realized there was a mistake in that journey and leading up to that he hadn't, with the control that was given enough clarity and capability. And so when we're talking about how we empower our teams, there's a real dimension between how much we're giving and how much support we're providing. So if we're wanting people to move to a really high empowered state, then we really need to build that capability for those people as we go through to give them that ability to be able to make those decisions or do those tasks. So I want to talk very quickly now around the journey that we went through. So looking at that axis around alignment, capability, and clarity, and on the other side, the control, autonomy, and empowerment. We started for us really looking at what is the principles and the basic roles and responsibilities. So I think, Beth, you mentioned early on around providing that real clarity, and Pip, you mentioned about boundaries. So very much from a principle perspective, we set those boundaries as principles. They had freedom to play within those areas, and we set out some basic roles and responsibilities, which they helped to co-create. As we went through, we then recognized that we needed to help build capability. So lots of training and mentoring around this people leadership model and how we're going to approach it and what do they need to be aware of. And then as we built the capability, then we built the responsibilities. And so it was tied together as we go through, as opposed just to giving all the responsibilities off the bat and not giving them time and space to be able to explore it and making sure that there was enough support. Importantly, we put in feedback loops and regular sessions to ask them how they were feeling, what is the main things that they're experiencing, what's the challenges, and how we can help. So almost like a clinic, a regular session with the leadership team to be able to explore and have free voice to be able to talk about what was challenging for them, so that we could give them feedback, they could give us feedback, and we could work on how to build this environment together. And finally, running experiments, working out what is the thing that we want to change, what's the experiment that we need to run, and as a result, tuning the model from there. So together, working our way through that journey and that journey map that you saw earlier on to be able to navigate it and co-create it. So The next thing is then, okay, so it's a journey, and we know that we need to involve people on the journey. But the question is who's responsible in reality? So we know with great empowerment comes great responsibility. So where does that responsibility sit? Well, let's talk about those 4 categories I mentioned. And we're going to start with individuals. So the first thing is we really need people to be able to explore being curious. We really want individuals to really own, identify, and solve or propose how to solve problems. So we know people can identify the problems. And you know that old adage about bring me solutions, don't bring me problems. So how do we really get that ingrained? And really being ready and prepared to make decisions, and being ready to reach out beyond their silo or their comfort space to connect with others and co-create. So there's some real things in there that we need people to be responsible for at an individual level. In terms of the team level, and this comes through with a comment that came in before, is how do we hold each other to account? So how do we have the skill as individuals where there is underperformance or performance challenges within a team? How do we do that ourselves to hold each other to account? What's the mechanisms for that? How do we seek advice, and from who when we need to? And then how do we bake in that continuous improvement? And importantly, how do we actually provide insight? So we're choosing the best ways of working, but how do we funnel the insights from what we're doing at the front line to others in the organizations who might also be making decisions around where we're going from an organization perspective? So those insights are super important. So there's some changes in terms of what we're expecting teams to do. Now, from a leader perspective, it's really moving. We still need to give direction. There's less of the direct in terms of do X, Y, Z, but direction is still fundamentally important. And sometimes when leaders think they're being empowering by giving a story and then walking away, that doesn't give people enough direction to know what's right or wrong. Do they turn left or right? What do they do with that information? So direction's really important. And then secondly, in that is how do we connect them to the right parts of the organization for them to be able to make the connections themselves, to be able to go and find the right people, connect, and be able to do those things that normally the leader would be doing. Secondly, the role is more about coaching and helping build that capability continuously and giving feedback and providing that clarity that we mentioned earlier on. Now, from an organization perspective, it's still really important to look at the big picture. Is the environment conducive to being able to work in collaborative ways? Are there policies that enable empowered ways of working, not constrict it? You know, if you've got KPIs that are still individually driven, then you're going to get more siloed thinking. So what are the policies that we have, and does it help or does it hinder? And then finally, transparency. Is there enough transparency in the organization so it's very clear that as we're all pulling together, we know where the organization is going and what the current situation is and what's coming up? So that transparency is really important. Across all of those areas, though, feedback and having those feedback loops all between those spaces is incredibly important. And then finally, transparency doesn't just exist at the organization level, from an individual level. Where am I at? Do I need help? What am I working on? And you'll see that in Agile many times. Same with the team, same with the leaders, all the way through the organization. So how do you bake those layers of transparency and feedback in so that empowerment is more accessible to everyone? Okay, I'll pause there. Just, is there any questions on anything? Just pop them in chat. We've got Misper and also Andy Cooper on the call, so they'll be able to jump in with any viewpoints. And also, if you've got any views, jump in and answer those questions as well. We're going to take a deep dive into individuals, and we're just going to look at the individual lens for a couple of moments, and then we're going to look at the other dimensions. But in the meantime, if there's any questions, please jump into the chat. So if we were to put our shoes on, well, our individual shoes on, and look at it from their perspective, then here are some of the questions that come up that we've discovered as we've looked at empowerment in our organization and what we've seen in other organizations. So if we sort of go for a really highly empowered organization, there can be many things that are emergent. And some of the questions that then come up for individuals particularly is, who do I go to for what now? Who does what? What don't I know that now I'm making decisions, but I don't know what I don't know, and now I'm a little bit unsure. And then that question about what's right and what's wrong, and then what can I decide in reality? What am I able to do? What does this thing meaning empowerment mean for me? So those are questions that really come up very strongly for people. And people often ask, well, why is it? Why isn't everyone just able to jump in and just go for it? And the simple fact is that our organizations, which have been born out of the Industrial Revolution, really are a little bit like a rat's maze, in that they can be hard to navigate, but once you've sort of got the hang of it, then actually you can run through that maze very quickly. You know who to talk to, there's policies, there's processes, there's rules, there's process maps, there's all these things that make it very easy to navigate once you know the ins and outs. And when we start looking at empowerment and we take away some of those constraints and those really strict rules and minute ways of doing things, then it creates more ambiguity for people. So we need to be conscious of that. So what does it mean from an individual perspective to navigate? There are some changes that we need for individuals. One is they need to be able to feel safe, that it's okay to be wrong, that we learn from mistakes. In fact, it's the best way to learn. So they need to really be able to have that feeling, and we've got a role to play in terms of supporting that. We need a certain level of bravery to try. So even though we set up the environment, we're really looking for individuals to be brave and to step forward and to try things. So that's a big change. And obviously being okay in the gray and things changing rapidly. If we have a lot of empowerment, that means that we're going to have decisions coming faster. Things are going to be changing. We don't have that printed out, rule book that we used to have in the office. Things change faster. So individuals need to be stronger in the gray and being able to navigate that change. And then we also want them to be able to reach out and connect. That can be really hard when it comes to a hybrid environment, trying to find people's space and calendars just to be able to connect, but it's really important. So how do we get people comfortable with reaching out, with connecting, making new connections, collaborating, being okay if their idea isn't the winner on the day, is also really important, because our egos are trying to protect us in our roles and our titles. So some of those things have to be let go as well. And then ultimately that word again, trust. So also giving leadership some trust to say, okay, you're saying it's okay to make mistakes, and you're saying it's this, I'm going to try it. I'm going to go for it. And in return, I'm going to give you my commitment. Then I'm going to follow through on these things, and you can trust me too in building that relationship. So there's a lot of change for individuals to embrace from that perspective. So I just wanted to sit on that for a moment with you. If anyone's got any other comments or thoughts around changes from an individual perspective, please chuck that in chat as we go through as well. So let's talk about teams. So we've got teams of individuals. And I'll talk very quickly about a quick case study. So there was an organization, it was a tech startup, it was in New Zealand, and they had an amazing culture, or at least on the packet, it was an amazing culture. And in fact, their stand-ups were lie-downs. They could do them in bed. Their working hours were so flexible that they could sign on whenever they wanted to. They could sign off whenever they wanted to. They had game afternoons on a regular basis where they could just down tools and jump on some games together and do that kind of stuff. So it was a great fun culture, and they focused on that fun environment and the flexibility of working from home and having flexible hours and all that kind of stuff. The problem was that the organization started to have challenges, and everyone was very autonomous in how they operated. And when the leadership actually started to ask the teams about why they weren't performing and what they needed, what they found out is that teams were lacking these things. So I call it street cred, but really what it stands for is they were missing clarity. So the feedback from the team was that they didn't have clarity around what the goals were that they needed to be able to achieve by when, that they didn't have very clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities. So what was the expectations that they had in terms of their role and what they could get others in terms of what the others' responsibilities were. So that was really important to them. Also, they were missing the expectations from a business perspective. As a startup, you know, things are invested, you have funders, or I think that's the term, funders, maybe not. If anyone knows the right term, pop in the chat. But they have expectations from investors, there's the word, thank you, that they weren't aware of. And so they were missing those expectations, causing frustration with leadership. But if they had known that, they would have been able to adjust their plans. And finally, from a decisions perspective, that they weren't clear on what decisions they could really make. They heard that they could make decisions, but they didn't really know what that meant. So how do they clarify what that was? Yeah, and you're quite right, Zoe. It's really demotivating if you don't have it, because you feel like you're working in a fog. You feel like that you're really trying, but you're working in quicksand and you're not quite sure how you can get out. So those were 4 things that they called out that they really, really needed in order to be a high-performing team. So they had kind of this autonomy idea, but they didn't really have those 4 things that helped them to be successful. Now, there is a tool that you can use in terms of decisioning. Some of you will have seen this before. There's also a tool with Management 3.0, but I really recommend this particular set, and it's called the decision cards. And so that means that a team can sit with a leader and they can look at all the different types of decisions, and then using a card system is work out where is the decision line. Can they decide together? Do they need to seek advice? Can they just advise? What does the leader just need to know? What is the different levels and layers? And then they can really articulate that by decision. So that's an important tool. If you haven't seen that, it's a great one to check out. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on leadership. So I'll go through reasonably quickly. I think I've got a few minutes left, haven't I, Miss? But maybe 10. So if we look at leaders, then let's have a look. Now, in the HBR research, it said that employees who thought their leaders were more empowering were people who obviously were going to feel more empowered at work. So because their leaders acted in that particular way, they felt as a result of that, they had greater sense of autonomy and control in their work. And as a result, leadership does play a really critical role. So we talked about this picture before, that actually it seems a little bit tricky to get the balance right. So how do we do that? Well, let's have a look at a scale. Interestingly, as we explored the scale, we found that there were different levels. So obviously on the left-hand side, we didn't want this. We wanted to move away from directing and make sure that we weren't dictating. So that's an obvious one. We don't ever want to sit in that space. However, what can happen unconsciously is that as we start to release control and give more space, we jump in the helicopter, but then we give commentary from the helicopter, a little bit like the old helicopter parenting phrase. Oh, don't go that way. Oh, well, I wouldn't have done that. And that in itself, well, that's not quite in the empowerment phase. We're still giving direction. We're just giving it from a further distance. So we're not quite there yet. So then how do we get to the empowerment phase without going too far? So if we go past that line, then suddenly we're in frozen, singing Let It Go, and the leaders are stepping back too far. And as a result of that, then everyone feels like their boss is Casper the Ghost. And so really getting that balance right is really important. But the only way to find out where that balance is to talk to the teams and keep checking in with them. How does this feel? Do you have enough from me? Is there anything else that you need? Or do you need a bit more space? Do you need a bit more time? Okay, let's talk about that. And how do we support you? So getting feedback is the only way that you're going to find out, because for one team, it's going to be different to the other team. And even for that one team, sometimes because if the situation changes, they want you to come closer back and give them more direction. So if things get really hot, things get really hard, they'll want leaders closer and you need to be able to respond. And then again, let it go and give them more space when things get back on track. Okay. So what are some of the things that leaders can do? I'm going to give you just 4 things. And if you guys have got any other ideas, it's a lot like parenthood actually in the chat. So a good call out. I'm going to give you 4 things. If you have any other ideas, please put them in chat, and you might draw on some inspiration from parenthood, because again, it's a nurturing role. You might find some other things to put in there. So feel free to share. Warning, it is harder than it sounds, by the way. I'm going to give you 4 really simple things, but getting them into your own habits is going to be tricky. Let's talk about it. Sometimes what I hear from leaders is this idea that, well, I haven't seen them be able to do it, so I don't trust them. And I've never seen anyone be able to do that. And the idea from David Marquette, and I know that at least one of you was a fan of David Marquette, so you'll like this quote, is that waiting for people to prove themselves before trusting them is backwards. We really, as leaders, have to give them the trust first, give them the authority and autonomy, and give them the opportunity to prove themselves. Doing it the other way around, they will never be able to get your trust because they can't show you, they can't demonstrate. So find opportunities where you can do that safely if that's a concern for you, with support if that's a worry, and then you'll get it the right way around. The other thing is that, you know, quote from Steve Jobs is it really doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And if we don't start as leaders with that mindset, if we don't honestly believe that, you're going to struggle to give empowerment to your teams, because your own habits are going to get in your way of being able to give team empowerment. You're going to slide back on the scale. So number 1, making sure that we've got the right mindset is really important. Okay, let's talk about language. So as a leader, and even as we're talking to each other, really, language is really critical. So if we start off and we say, hey team, I want this, can you do this, please, is a nice addition, but that's not empowering just by saying please. So that's still in the directing space. Is this predetermined solution that I already have in my head feasible? That's still really telling people what to do. I'm thinking XYZ, but what do you think? Well, we're getting a little bit closer to it, but we're still leading people. We're still in the helicopter suggesting what they should do from a team perspective. So really searching deep down and looking at your language and how you're talking is really key. So we've got this problem, we've got this opportunity. Team, what's your thoughts on how we can solve it? What do you think? What do you need from me? Now that's a very different conversation. That's much more in that empowering space. What do you need from me? Yeah, great call out on the book recommendation in the chat too. So really looking at our language, even if you just observe it for a couple of days and see where you're going with it and see where are you sitting in that scale, can be a really good reflection exercise. So that's tip number 2. There is a link to the video as well. It's another David Marquette link, so that can give you some great tips in this space as well. Okay, now tip number 3, can we reverse this? So here's what happens in organizations and lots of conversations, is that the team member and the leader have a very different mix in terms of space and time in the meeting. So if the leader is giving on the right-hand side 80% of the opinion and only asking 20% of the questions, and the team member has 80% of the questions, only 20% of the opinion, then you've got that dynamic, you've got that hierarchy at play. You're not really having an empowering conversation. They're just taking notes, basically. And so how do we reverse this? So the leader is asking the questions, exploring, being curious, and the team members are the ones who are providing all the content, the opinions, the thoughts, and the thought leadership in that space. So how do we reverse that model is another key area for reflection. The next, sorry to all any leaders on the call, please stop saving the day. This comes down to the same story that you would have heard in terms of you can give a man a fish and feed him for a day, or you can teach him to fish or her and feed them for a lifetime. It really is the same thing when it comes to empowerment. And in fact, one thing to be really careful of is the drama triangle. If you haven't heard of it and haven't used it, I see some of you nodding on the screen. please check it out, because if we come in and rescue, we're just reinforcing that there's a victim and the prosecutor, and that's not an empowering space. That's still something that's very dependent on a leader. And so removing those dependencies is really key. So number 4, the final one there, was around stop saving the day. So sorry, team. Instead, move into coach mode and build capability. Okay, just one final reflection from a leadership perspective, and that is empowerment is not a word. All right. I mean, it is a word, technically, you've got me there, but it's not just a word that we should be using. And it's not delegated authority. Sure, we need to be clear about what the delegated authority is, but that in itself is not all that empowerment is. The second one is not a process. You can't just follow A, B, C, and then voila, everyone's empowered and it's a beautiful place to work. And it's more than a mindset in reality. And I'll tell you what it is, and that is it's a relationship. There is new levels of relationship with your team from an empowerment perspective. There's more inclusion, there's more care, there's more curiosity about their strengths and how you can connect all of those strengths that they have and bring them to bear in the organization. It's all about how can we help get that beautiful sweet spot about where somebody wants to develop and what the organization needs, and really support that and drive that growth. So from my perspective, empowerment is about the relationship. It is a relationship between people of trust and of inclusion. So hopefully that just provides a different perspective around empowerment. All right, I'm going to wrap up now talking about the organization. So we've talked about individuals, we've talked about leaders, we've talked about teams. Let's talk about the organization for a moment. In reality, when we're talking about organizations, we're really talking about shifting competencies left. And what I mean by that is that in organizations, from a traditional perspective, we have a certain percentage of people who are leaders in the organization, and those leaders are given leadership training to be able to support others, provide good guidance, make decisions, and do all of those things. In reality, in an empowered organization, you need to shift those capabilities left, that all team members need to have a certain level of self-leadership. They all need to have a certain level of leadership capability. We need to be thinking about their capability from being able to make decisions, to take risks, to provide points of view, to be brave, to connect, to collaborate, to co-create, so that those capabilities that used to be reserved for the echelon that is the leadership now need to come left to everyone in the organization. So being really mindful of that is really important. And so if we look at competency shifts, and I know this came up earlier in our call around capability, let's have a look at that for a moment. So particularly from a leader perspective, if we start on the right-hand side, things around connecting people to a purpose, connecting people to each other, how we language things, how we frame things, how we still connect to storytelling is really important. Having a stronger capability in coaching, getting stronger at giving feedback, because we can't rely on, well, these were your KPIs and your annual performance time, we're trying to manage based on that, is no longer enough. So giving feedback that helps people grow instead of telling them what's wrong is really important. Leaning into hard conversations early, sense making, being able to use different sense making tools is really critical, particularly in our changing world. And there's an overlap. Those three capabilities about giving feedback, leaning into hard conversations, and sense making are also in the domain of the team. And in the team space, we need more capabilities around problem solving, decision making, systems thinking, business acumen. How can we ask teams to be able to make decisions if they don't have some of the awareness and knowledge around the business and business acumen that's relevant to their areas, so they understand the impact of the decisions they make? So those are just some things to be thinking about in an organization perspective around what capabilities do we need in our business at a team level as well as a leadership level. Okay, let's talk for a very brief moment about achieving long-term enlightenment. Let's call that long-term empowerment. So there's a few things that we need to do, and this really sits in the people and culture space. So how we have our policies, that language that we use in our policies is also indicative of our environment and our culture. So even the language we choose to use is really important, as well as the policies, the rules, and the guidelines. Are they conducive? Are they reflective? Are they congruent with this idea of empowerment in your organization? Being really clear about those competencies, it may require a redesign. We do need to be thinking about being future ready. We need to be able to be evolvable. So we can't anchor so strongly around job descriptions. We need to be thinking more broadly around how we act and those soft skills as much as the technical skills, particularly now today when you've got AI that can serve up all of the knowledge recall that people used to rely on. We need to be able to use other competencies and other skills. Role design needs to be looked at. So relationships become more important, being really explicit at the team level, even within teams, to be able to understand each other and what roles everyone needs to play. And at the org level more broadly, then JDs themselves need to be more flexible. Those formal documents need to be cut down to give people more room, so the JDs are something that people can stand on, not stay within. So that's an important perspective. Leadership development needs to go across more people, redefining leadership from a more coaching perspective instead of directing, and making it available to more people. Reward and recognition, obviously a lot of you in the agile space would already understand that anyway, but it's about the team and not the individual. It's about the outcomes and not the activity or the outputs. And in recruitment, I think this came up in the chat before around how we hire people, that diversity of thought and experience, testing for the competencies that we're looking for, that flexibility, people's ability to be a grey operator or operate in the grey. Those are all things to be looking for right at the beginning stage of bringing somebody into the organization. And then from an employee lifecycle perspective, very quickly, each stage of that employee life cycle, from the time that we reach out to them in the first place, bring them on board in the organization, have them with us and exit, all of the parameters around being empowered and seeking their advice and input and autonomy needs to be reflected at each of those stages. So it's something that we need to do holistically in the organization. So let's wrap up from there and we can go to a bit of Q&A and discussion. And that leaders, it's really important that we look at the meaning. So what does empowerment really mean to your team that you're supporting? Not what you think empowerment means. So what is that for your team? Looking at your language and your stance, where are you on that scale? Are you popping into the right places at the right time? And tuning, you'll hear more about tuning in David Marquet's work, so you'll be able to look out more on there. And then sharing, make sure that you share information with your team. Is there decisions that you can share with your team rather than you making it? And from an individual and team perspective, individuals leaning in, getting clear about clarity, roles and responsibilities, expectations and decisions. And then from an organization perspective, really thinking about the vision. How far do you want to go in reality? What does empowerment mean? How do you describe that in your organization? And review your people strategy. What are some things that you could tune? If you can't tune at all, what are some small changes that you can make? And making sure that we've got feedback loops in place. Now I have got some further reading for you, of course, so that's all in there. And then to round out the talk as well, a lot of you might ask, well, so how did you go when you're a self-organizing, self-evolving, self-selecting organization? Well, hey, we're on the journey, but we're making good progress. We've won some awards from a Great Place to Work perspective, and we've just got another one for 2023. But the thing is, it's ongoing and we're doing it together. That's the thing that I'm most proud about, because we've got feedback loops and we'll continue to evolve it and strive to continue to build empowerment in our organization together. So we'll hand it over now to a bit of Q&A. And I did see a question earlier on. I think it was Zoe, you asked a question about personalities. Does this change the way that it shapes how people may lead? Do you want to just kind of talk about your question for a second and then we can kick off the Q&A? Or was it Wendy? Wendy and Zoe? maybe I'll jump in. Feel free. I know the mute button can sometimes be tricky to find as it gets lost on the screen. But the question there was, do you think there are certain personality types that lend themselves to being more empowering leaders than others? Probably. Those people that are in the space where they're more people orientated might find it easier to build the relationships and the nurturing aspect of the role, rather than those who are more mission driven from that perspective. But there's a flip side to that too, that there are personalities that lend themselves from a team member perspective to wanting more empowerment than others. Some people might not want as much empowerment as you may want to give them. So even at the individual level, depending on that, that could definitely be a player. And the other thing, of course, is that depending on their personality type, is they will need different things if you're asking them to make decisions. So some personality types will need more data and will be more risk conservative. Others will be like, let's just go on a gut feel, and it's more people orientated. So it will definitely play in from that perspective. So hopefully that answers. Anything else that anybody wanted to add on to that before we go to the next question in chat? Or feel free to add to the chat as well. Okay, we've got a question there about how does everyone here cope with organizations and organizational cadence, agile QBR, where it's unrelenting? I'm asking, how do you empower in a safe way under high pressure? Anyone have got any thoughts on that before I dive in? Feel free to jump in chat if you do as well. So it's a really good question in terms of the continuous cadence and cycle from an agile ways of working perspective. So obviously, I'm not sure if it's more of a well-being question than it is an empowerment question, but certainly that feedback loop in with people to understand how are they going? How is the pressure for them? How is the pace for them? And checking to see whether your empowerment or what you thought was good empowerment is actually the right balance for them. So do they have enough information? Do they have enough clarity in terms of the boundaries or the direction, the priorities? That's usually a tricky point for teams that are really empowered, is that the priorities aren't clear. So making sure that for what empowerment that you've given, they've got enough information, clarity, and all of those things that we've talked about is really important. And then check to see if the pace is sustainable as well. So that would be my quick answer to that. But open to the floor if anyone else has got any other thoughts on that for Jen. All right. Just see if there's any other questions. Yeah, a great call out from Beth too. Let the system break, not the people. Need to see the problem to be able to address the problem. So sometimes, the system is in place to surface problems, pain point areas, and being able to identify that and work that is really important.
B, there was a question from Pip, or perhaps more an ask around suggestions for how you would work with teams that don't have the skills you've identified, like not being flexible, they hate being in the gray. Do you have any suggestions for that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that you would have to design with them what great empowerment looks like and use that to inform what might be the first step. And just take really small steps and then use that continuous improvement to reflect from there. So choose a really small space depending on what they feel is empowerment and what that looks like, and then take a little step towards it, but really kind of go on a journey with them. It certainly isn't something that you could just turn on, because they wouldn't believe it if they were sitting in a space where they perhaps weren't up for the challenge or didn't feel like everything was in play. So there's lots in here in the empowerment space around belief and how teams feel, because it's been, oh, you're empowered for so long. We've used this term very carelessly, that there can be distrust in teams to be able to turn that around, just from what I've seen in organizations too. All right, and I think, was that the final question?
Yeah, looks like it. And that brings us bang on to time with probably 30 seconds left. So I just want to say thank you so much, Bianca, for sharing your insights with us and the journey that you've been on around empowerment. It's been really fascinating hearing you talk about that and all the great tips and insights that you've shared with us. Just a call out for everyone as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I've popped a link to our LinkedIn page if you do want to join future events or want to, just learn about anything business agility related. Please go ahead and follow us online. And like I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing the recording of this session. So again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.
See you on the
Thanks,
next
guys.
one.
Right, thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, B. Thanks all.